we are covering what constitutes amazing relationships and why relationships. Why is it such an important topic? And so first of all, we have to kind of define it for ourselves, and obviously everybody's going to have their own subtle definition of what that looks like. But essentially, what amazing relationship to me looks like is that it's a relationship at the basic human level, that it's meeting your needs and you're meeting the other person's need or the other group's need. And it's a reciprocal process, which means that in the process, ideally, what we're doing is we're supporting each other, if it's two individuals or group members, to move ahead, no matter what the challenges are, no matter what the problems are, and support each other to go towards our potential, towards our happiness, towards our growth, towards these things that we idealize. And to me, those are amazing relationships. Now, here are some misconceptions around that. So it was funny because, and I'll share my experience, I grew up seeing a lot of conflict between my parents, between family members. So to me, conflict became a very negative thing. From the child's perspective, it was painful to watch conflict, especially if it's not getting resolved, especially if nobody's talking about it. There's just conflict, nothing happened, and you move on. And then the same thing comes back up. And then the same thing, and it happened over and over and over and over again. And because it was painful for a child to experience that, especially the child doesn't have a context of what's going on when conflicts happen. In the same way, like if you have a baby, one of the first, like if you've been around babies or if you had a child, one of the first things that is painful to that child is actually hunger. Like hunger is incredibly painful, not because like we feel the same pain, but we have more context around hunger that, oh, I'm going to get food and it'll be fine. We might act out here and there, but for a child, it's actually very painful because it doesn't actually know what's going to happen. The body is new, everything is new, all of a sudden it feels pain and it cries, and that's how it communicates as well. In a very similar way, for a child, conflict can be very negative, especially if it's not resolved. And so I'm giving that example. So for me, as I grew up, I associated a negative thing to conflict. By the way, it's a very common thing that I've noticed a lot of people have. Conflict hasn't been resolved in their family. So instead of looking at the process of conflict, which is actually a necessary process of dialogue, I found myself running away from conflict because it created a lot of fear inside. So anytime I would notice conflict, I would do anything to diffuse it, whether it's in my relationship with my spouse, whether I saw my parents fighting, or whether I got into an argument, something, I needed to diffuse it quickly. It wasn't about resolving. It wasn't about, it needed to be diffused because it was too painful for me. As you can see, that could not go very well, because now think about it, like simple thing as I want a promotion at a job, and I go to my boss, and the boss is a little bit more authoritarian and very upfront, and I ask for something, and it starts to get a little bit, the conversation starts to move forward, and my body perceives that to go towards a conflict. What happens? I want to shut it down. I have a disagreement with my wife. Something happens, I disagree, we go into this dialogue. My system is like, alarm, 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 shut it down. Nothing ever gets resolved. And this hit me just a few years ago. That was a blind spot for me. That, oh shoot, I'm running away from conflict. In fact, what we're learning more and more, relationships that are better, they actually go towards conflict, not away from it. And conflict means that they go towards the resolution of that conflict. So they don't inherently look at conflict as a negative thing. In fact, it's an opportunity a lot of times to work through something. And the reason why I'm going into this is that we have all sorts of these little patterns that we've picked up in our childhood environment. And then it gets amplified when we watch other people model the same thing over and over and over. and we create a solidified pattern, and we repeat the same thing over and over and over in every relationship. And this is where you can actually take this to a very bigger scale and say that when you look at an organization, and when organizations, for example, claim that, oh, we have system problems, you can pretty much assume that the problem is not in the system. The problem is the human error. And the way you do this, you actually go in there and start asking questions, what's going on? And you will find that there are issues in terms of how the problem has started from top down, how the leader thinks about it, how the leader looks at relationships, how the main core team is connecting with each other, how they're resolving their stuff, how are they communicating their vision, their values, are they even communicating that, how are they treating other members, clients, and everybody else. That sets up the culture. And then over time, it looks like it's those tools and systems that are not working very well. No, it goes back to the core. That's why even as a business coach, one of the first things I'm taught is when you go to an organization, you first clarify their vision. And within that, there are their values. What do they stand for? What are they trying to create? Is their team on board? Do they understand it? Have you communicated that? Can everybody, without talking to each other, communicate the same thing? More than likely, that's not the case. And it's the same, for example, within a family. If you go within a family, one of the best, most amazing fortune that I've had is working with the whole family, the parents, the teenagers, the two kids, and I've coached each of them individually. And I had no idea, like I had a perspective on it, but when you actually look at it, none of them knew anything about each other. They only understood things at a very, very surface level about the other person. Most of the rest was assumptions. Assumptions based on how this person has been up until that moment, which does not take into account that person's growth, does not take into account the context changes. So the whole relationship becomes, how can I box this person into how this person was? And this is where that idea of healing begins, is that if we go with the intention into the world with those kind of patterns, those kind of blind spots, those kind of emotional patterns that we haven't resolved, and we try to come up with solutions, then guess what? You're carrying on that part of you with yourself. There's this author that wrote, he's like, have you watched somebody go from one job to the next job, to the next job, from one marriage to the next marriage, to the next marriage? It's very obvious to everybody else that they're the problem, but they're the only ones who are not able to see it. Because they don't realize that they carry themselves in every situation. It was a comedian, I think, talk about it. It's like, if somebody is telling you that my last boss was a problem, it's like, oh, what about the boss before that? It's like, yeah, he was a problem too. And what about the one? And she was a problem too. I'm like, are you sure they were the problems? Why is it that every boss has a problem with you? And it's an attitude problem, but where does the attitude come from? It comes from us not healing. Now, this clarifies a couple of things here, that we're all on a journey. We don't need to be perfect. We just acknowledge, and the process of vulnerability comes in. That, hey, I am a work in progress, and you're a work in progress, and everybody else around us, they're works in progress. We will make mistakes, which means that just because we understand, just the fact that we understand that we can make mistakes, we can be reactive, we can completely miss a situation, everybody else can too. So that brings a level of compassion. And that brings a level of understanding that, hey, let me try to understand this, even though I'm being reactive. When I take a pause, maybe this person didn't mean what this person said in that team meeting. Maybe my child didn't mean that, or my teenager didn't mean that. Maybe my wife, husband didn't mean that, or my life partner didn't mean that, or I heard it in a way where it affected a part of me that was very reactive. And that's where the thing that I harp on a lot on is the collaboration piece. Because I essentially, at the core level, I look at all our relationships as collaboration. Doesn't matter if you're in your home, your household. It doesn't matter if you're with your team. Doesn't matter if you're outside with other people that you interact with. We're all in this kind of binding relationship. The levels of commitments are different, but they all fall into the same thing. Whether you look at the team, life partner, family relationship, friends, we all fall into a collaborative process. And it starts from our circle, unless we can begin the healing process here, then we take forward whatever we carry in these relationships. And think of a leader who hasn't healed to these parts and who's not even aware that they need healing, and they go with this arrogance that I'm going to fix the world. Guess what they do? They bring more pain into the world. By the way, have you watched Black Panther? Okay, so think of the archetype in Black Panther. It's very interesting. So the guy whose father was kind of kicked out of the tribe, who experienced and who has experienced pain all his childhood. He grew up very effective, very powerful, amazing, in every sense of the word of competent. Like he was a top military, top Marine, top everything. But when he went out there to create a change, what did he create? He went there to basically, first, let me take over this because I have the right to take over this kingdom. And then I'm gonna, as soon as he takes over, one of the first actions, we're taking over the whole world in this exact same way. How? By spreading pain. And when Black Panther saw that, first of all, he had to acknowledge that his ancestors, his parents, grandparents, they were wrong about that whole thing. They shouldn't have left a child alone like that. They shouldn't have kept these secrets. First, he had to acknowledge that, so there was compassion involved. And then there was pain. He's like, all he was dealing with was suffering and pain. And it had to be stopped, otherwise it was spreading everywhere. Even at the end, he wanted to save him for that specific reason, that he didn't directly see him as the problem. Even though he was responsible as an adult, but he was an effect of so many other things too. And unless we can deal with that, it affects everything. And so it starts with our home. It starts with our space, with our team, with our clients, and it just spreads out. And it's not hard to see when you look at the picture how it can go out of control in the world. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there's positive and negative. So that means that there are things that we're doing very well. There are things that we're not doing very well as well. So what does that mean for us as our perspective? We need to first of all define what these amazing relationships look like. Are we building relationships based on a healing journey for us and for everybody around us? Are we building relationships based on understanding that we don't have all the answers? We're all doing our best to move forward. And we're building relationships to ideally bring joy. At times we will bring pain. At times we will bring fear. At times we will bring all those things, but understanding that we're growing in the process. And communicating that vulnerably, that, hey, I make mistakes. Hey, I screw up every day. It's okay. How do we work through this? And that creates an openness, I feel like. That engages a different part of us. That engages that, okay, I don't need to be fearful. I just need to be mindful. I just need to be aware of how do I want to show up intentionally? I can make mistakes. I just need to be 2% better the next day. And that is the process of growth. And what does this mean for your personal life? Well, the quality of our relationships a lot of times determines the quality of our life. And if the quality of our relationships are not good, whether that's in your home, it's in your circle or anywhere, that affects how you feel. No matter how aware you are, no matter how much you have healed, our social environment affects us. Why? Because at our core, we're a social species. What does that mean in business? The quality of our relationships with our contractors, with our partners, with our team, with our clients determines the longevity of the business. Do they feel cared for? Do they feel supported? Do they feel like we actually care based on our services and products? Or are we just creating some kind of marketing scheme? And companies who are long-lived, they are paying attention to their clients in whatever way they need to pay attention to those clients. Companies who go out of business, especially in these times when you're looking at recession and all these things that are coming up, a lot of companies who haven't cared for their clients, for their employees, for their team, for their contractors, they tend to fall behind. They tend to get affected. And so something for you to think about is that what does constitute amazing relationship for you? And defining that based on the needs that you have, based on the growth that you're creating, based on the happiness that you're creating, based on the joy that you're bringing, based on the environment and culture that you're creating can be incredibly powerful. But it needs to be an intentional process. In that same process, it needs to be communicated to the people around you. And if those values are not upheld, it can be very, very challenging to grow even individually in that environment.